Hi again everyone. Today's video was inspired by me being tagged on Facebook to do the album tag. Both hubby and I were tagged to do this, and having done it, it led to a kind of tangential conversation about how eclectic and wide-ranging our music tastes were. And off we went in random wafflage, and I thought I would share said random wafflage with you. The original Facebook tag just requires you to put up the pictures of the albums with no further explanation. I thought it might be fun to go further into the backstory of each album. I was required to choose 12, which I confess was kind of difficult, and in many ways the albums that I've chosen actually are more representative of the artist rather than that particular album itself. When I was a little girl, one of my favourite trips out was to visit my great aunt Alice and her husband, great uncle Alf. Now, Aunt Alice lived in a house practically identical to the one that I now live in, a 2-up, 2-down Victorian terrace, but she was of the generation that kept the front room for best. It was her parlour. Her life basically happened in the back room and the kitchen. That's where the telly was and the sofa was, and that's where the dining table was. And in all the years that I went down there, I think I slept in there once, and we may have used it a couple of times for parties, but most of the time the front parlour was kept spotlessly clean, but very much for best. Anyway, this one particular visit, Aunt Alice had sent me into the front room to get a glass or something out of the cabinet. And out of the corner of my eye, I spotted this beautiful face. So having retrieved the glass, I went to Aunt Alice and I asked her who this face belonged to. And from out of the corner cupboard, she pulled an album, a record sleeve out, and she said, "Well, have a listen." And she put the record on the record player, and out of this beautiful face came this beautiful voice. And this was really the start of my musical education, in a way. That first album that I listened to was the soundtrack to one of his many films. And let's be honest, most of his films are utter tosh, but the music is just fantastic. The artist concerned was Elvis Presley, and the album was GI Blues. Now, having discovered Elvis Presley, this led me further to the likes of Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, Bill Haley. I discovered rock and roll. In a way, this was my first venture into an alternative subculture. There were no teddy girls and teddy boys around at this time. And in discovering rock and roll, I discovered the clothes that went with it. So I had the full circle skirt with the big petticoats, and I had the tab sleeve t-shirts, and I had my hair up in a ponytail with a scarf tied round the base, and oh yeah, I thought I was the cat's pyjamas. I still like to venture into the gothabilly realm now and again. It's just classic and it's timeless, and it has to be said that no matter where my musical taste have led me since then, in my heart, my first love will always be rock and roll. This next album was quite important in that it was my first introduction to a more alternative style of music than the churned out production pop that was available at the time. I was bought this album as a gift, and I have no idea why the person who bought it for me thought I might like it. It was just one of those random happenings. Oh, I've bought you this. But I discovered the beautiful and ethereal voice of Kate Bush through this album, and I have been a fan ever since. No one who's followed me for any amount of time will be at all surprised by this next inclusion on my list. This is Anthem by Toya. This is the album that contains that pivotal track, I Want to Be Free. Now, it sounds incredibly pretentious and melodramatic to say that a song changed my life, but I truly believe that it did. when I first saw her on TV singing this, she was singing straight at me. She was singing it for me, and it was as if she gave me permission to truly be myself. Alongside that, I was absolutely fascinated by the symbolism Toya employed, not only in the artwork of her singles and her albums, but also in the clothes she wore and the jewellery she wore. Although I was raised a Christian in a Christian household, I had long been fascinated by ancient Egyptian mythology and had felt a very strong pull towards that spiritual system. I kind of took my very first tentative steps along that path as a result of exploring the symbolism on Toya's artwork that much further. The first thing I did to express that was to wear an ankh. I managed to get round that by saying that I wore an ankh because Toya was an ankh and I was just a big fangirl. Of course, having discovered Anthem, I then dived into Toya's back catalogue and have been following her ever since. I see her at least once a year and she still continues to be a huge inspiration to me. About the time that I got into Toya and was exploring an alternative way of presenting myself, the dance school that I attended got a new teacher, and she was a couple of years older than me, and there was something distinctly alternative about her too. Now, as it happens, she lived just round the corner from me, so she used to give me a lift there and a lift home, and I got to know her better, and I then got to know her then boyfriend and his best mate, and they became very much my social circle. Now, at the time, I was an alternative amongst a whole bunch of mainstream people, and I was pretty much isolated. Now, I grew up as an only child, and I'm very happy in my own company, so that never really bothered me. But it was quite nice to suddenly be amongst like-minded people who saw life and fashion and music in a different way to the rest of my contemporaries. And I was introduced to this artist, amongst others, by these people, and immediately again felt this massive connection. David Bowie is a just brilliant artist. Devastated at his passing earlier on this year, and this is one of my favourite albums of his. This is Aladdin Sane. And indeed, for a while I went round with the Aladdin Sane haircut in the Aladdin Sane colours. There are other albums of his that I absolutely adore, Heroes and Low and Station to Station, but Aladdin Sane was the one that really kind of got me into Bowie to start with. I think primarily because of the striking image on the front. Now, Bowie has been a huge influence on a lot of other artists that I really like, and Toya is not excluded from that group. So, a highly influential man and a very important part of my life. In my mid-teens, I started going to a local youth club as a means of trying to expand my social circle somewhat. And the first time I walked in, standing in front of me was this fella wearing a Toya t-shirt. Well, I was over the moon because it meant that I had some connection with somebody in this youth club. So we got chatting and we got friendly. We eventually dated for a little while. And this particular man had quite an influence on my musical tastes at the time because he was a metaler. So these next two albums, again representative of their artists, I have him to thank for these two. The first one is Ace of Spades by Motorhead. Loud, obnoxious, noisy, rock and roll. I love it. Motorhead was his favourite band at the time. May still be his favourite band for all I know. He introduced me to Motorhead, and along with that came Iron Maiden and Saxon and Whitesnake and everything else that goes along with it. Again, devastated at the loss of dear Lemmy at the end of last year. The second album, Rattus Norvegicus by the Stranglers. Now, at the time I was already into the Doors, and unfortunately I didn't have enough spaces on this list to be able to include the Doors. One of the things that drew me to the Stranglers was their keyboard sound, because it's very, very similar to that of the Doors. So that kind of gave me an edge in. And as it happens, I just really enjoyed the music after that anyway. So thank you, Ian, for introducing me to Motorhead and the Stranglers. This next album was to have a huge impact on my life in a way that I could not possibly imagine at the point at which I bought it. I had been to see Einstürzende Neubauten in concert, and they were supported by a band called Miranda Sex Garden, and I thought this lot were absolutely amazing, so I promptly ran out and bought their entire back catalogue. One of the albums was called Madra, and it was predominantly medieval madrigals. Not long after this, one of the members of Miranda Sex Garden, Catherine Blake, started the Medieval Babes, and if Madra was anything to go by, the Medieval Babes was going to be right up my alley, and this is the first of the Medieval Babes albums, called Salva Nos. It came to my attention that the Medieval Babes were playing at a medieval event called the Berkeley Joust. Now, I didn't realise this at the time, but the Berkeley Joust was set up by the Babes management as a means of promoting them. So myself and my friend toodled off down to Gloucestershire, booked ourselves into a hotel, and off we went to the joust to see the Medieval Babes. While we were there, we bumped into two people that we knew from the Sussex bonfire scene. We really didn't expect to see them there, and these guys were in full medieval kit, authentic medieval kit. And we were like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And they said, "We're in the Living History." "Oh, what? What's that?" So we went to their encampment in the Living History and saw what they were doing. The following year, when the Berkeley Joust was announced again, myself and my friend were invited to go along and participate in the Living History camp. And the bug bit, and the rest is history. As you know, I am still doing medieval Living History. The joust has now left Berkeley and is held at Loxwood, and yes, it still features the Medieval Babes. So I have to thank you very much, Catherine, and the rest of the Babes, for setting me on my path into medieval living history and reenactment. This next album probably appears in most of your album collections. I was aware of Susie and the Banshees, although weirdly I got into the Creatures first. And then I was given, once upon a time, the singles collection as a gift. And I absolutely loved it, and I wondered what had taken me so long. This sent me scuttling off into the Susie and the Banshees back catalogue, and I suppose really this was the start of my journey into gothdom. I can't really remember the first time I heard anything by the Fields of the Nephilim, but I can remember literally sitting there with my mouth wide open. This was just incredible. I absolutely loved it. The whole atmosphere of the songs and the look of the band and the underlying kind of almost ritualistic quality to many of the songs really struck a chord with me. Absolutely loved it. And this again was very close to the beginning of my jaunt into true gothdom. Really, I should have included First, Last and Always by the Sisters of Mercy in this list, but I simply didn't have the space. Only had 12 slots available. But again, that was another one of those seminal albums that really just struck a very deep chord with me and said, you need to come this way. You need to come this way. And so I did. Around the age of 18, I'd not long started work, and at lunchtime I'd gone down to the local high street to get myself something to eat. And a motorbike on the other side of the road piqued my interest because it was a real mishmash of different machines. There was a Kawasaki frame with a Suzuki engine and a Honda tank, and it just looked quite intriguing. So I went over to inspect closer. And whilst I was squatting down to have a look, the owner of said machine came out of a shop and caught me by surprise. This led to conversations, which led to friendship with said owner of this motorcycle, who introduced me to the next two bands. The first one being Dead Can Dance. And the album that I've chosen of theirs is Spleen and Ideal, as this was the first one that I was given to listen to. Lisa Gerrard is this tiny little lady who just opens her mouth and this enormous voice comes out. She has the most beautiful voice ever. Yes, there are the Enyas of this world, and there are the Moiras from Clenad, but if I had to choose who I consider to be the best female vocalist ever, it would have to be Lisa Gerrard. It's just stunningly beautiful. Brendan Perry's voice is so rich and so soulful. The music is so multi-layered, and I just love it. I absolutely love it. Anything that Lisa Gerrard or Brendan Perry produces is always of the highest quality, and frankly the pair of them could probably sing the phone book and still move me to the very depths of my soul. The next band that said owner of the motorcycle introduced me to was My Life with the Thrill Kill Kult. And this was really my first introduction to that kind of slightly more dancey side, almost the kind of cybergoth type stuff. I loved their very clever use of samples and snippets from the movies. And in a way, through Thrill Kill Cult, I ventured into Front 242 and Die Krups and kind of went off into the EBM side of gothdom. But it all started really with Thrill Kill Cult. I was lucky enough to see them in concert once. No backdrop, no flashy lights, just the guys with their synthesizers and a completely crazy lead singer. And I have to say, I had a whale of a time. The final album on my list is Exile by Gary Newman. I was familiar, of course, with Cars and Our Friends Electric, but hadn't really connected with him as an artist. Sometime later, I became reacquainted with an old friend who was incredibly into Gary Newman, and they asked me if I wanted to go and see him on the Exile tour. And it was like, well, yeah, okay, I'll give it a try. When I got there, I was completely blown away. The guy was just incredibly amazing. And again, that sent me scuttling off through his back catalogue. There are those albums which are not the highest quality in terms of Gary Newman output. They're not bad albums, but they're not great Gary Newman albums. But basically everything from Exile onwards has been pretty much top notch. But it was Exile really that started the love affair with Mr. Newman for me. And with any luck, I will be seeing him in London next Sunday. So there are my 12 influential albums. I probably could have gone to 15 or 20, but the tag said 12, so 12 was all I allowed myself. After both hubby and I had done this particular tag, we had a long conversation about how wide and eclectic our music tastes were, and how some people get very much tunnel vision in their music tastes. And hubby mentioned an old acquaintance of his who is into metal, and only metal, and if it isn't metal, he doesn't like it. Not that he would actually know whether he likes it or not, because if it isn't metal, he won't listen to it. Now, I define myself as a goth. Someone says to me, what is your subculture? Yes, I am a goth. And yes, I love an awful lot of goth music. There's not a lot I don't like. I don't like Christian Death. I don't like Specimen. I don't like Sex Gang Children. I don't like The Birthday Party. But I still define myself as a goth. I love the art. I love the literature. I love the history. I love the architecture. I love the fashion. I love the clothing. Yes, I am a goth. But I am defined as goth. I am not confined by goth. And I suppose really this little bit of the video is geared more towards the baby bats amongst you. You do not have to stop liking the music you liked before just because you now define yourself as goth. Nor do you have to not like any other kind of music that comes out in the future just because you now define yourself as goth. There may be those within your chosen subculture who will say, oh, you still like XYZ, you can't be a goth, metaler, whatever it is that you are, if you still like them. Yes, you can. I still love Elvis Presley. I can still sing along with 99% of the lyrics from the songs of 99% of his films, as dreadful as they are. I'm not going to stop loving Elvis Presley because I'm a goth. I'm not going to stop going to see Erasure because I'm a goth. I'm not going to stop taking my mum to see the Sid Lawrence Big Band Orchestra and have a whale of a time myself because I'm a goth. Do not allow your subculture to confine you. Do not allow other members of that subculture to confine you. You are who you are. You define yourself however you want to define yourself. Present yourself however you want to present yourself. But at the end of the day, be true to yourself. And if that means wearing your One Direction t-shirt under your long black dress, you go on and get on with it. Fair play to you. I'd be really interested to see what your 12 albums are. If you are watching this, consider yourself tagged. And please do let me know so that I can come along and have a look. Until then, take care. Bye.